One Piece chapter 1061. Now again, it seems like the Straw Hats are on the road again, and it's very unusual seeing this because we're just so used to Wano and having Kaido and Luffy battle it out every single chapter and seeing fights, and it's just been a long time since we've seen the Straw Hat actually go on an adventure. So it's actually great seeing that happen again with the Straw Hats, not knowing exactly where they're going next. And again, to our surprise, Oda did subvert expectations. A lot of people thought Elbaf, a lot of people thought Vera, but again, it seems like Oda just seems to like deviating to other places, and it makes sense coming off of an arc like Wano where we have about 150 chapters worth of content. It makes sense that we get a slow, shorter arc in between larger arcs that are coming soon, that I expect anyways. And I think this makes a lot of sense that we should be getting a much smaller arc here, maybe like a Zoe-like arc, transition arc, before going into the bigger ones like Albaf, of course. And you guys already know how good Oda is with shorter arcs. This is almost like a specialty. Zoe is a very good example of this, so I expect great things from this arc here. But before we keep going, guys, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Let's go for 1,000 likes as usual. Subscribe if you're new here, hit the bell if you want to get notified for future videos. And if you guys are interested in becoming a member of this channel, links are in the description, and your support will be greatly appreciated. But on to One Piece chapter 1061. Now the chapter starts off with the Straw Hat essentially trying to save Bonnie, right? And we get more clarity as to what happened beforehand, and it seems like Bonnie was getting chased by this giant shark thing, seemingly made out of metal. So it is a construct of some sort, but at the same time it's also acting like an animal. So that was already strange in of itself. So, and of course this is already setting up a mystery within the arc itself. Oda tends to do things like this. The beginning of an arc is usually where Oda's mystery factor comes in very heavily, right? And we're seeing that here. And something else that is also very noticeable in the beginning of arcs is the splitting up of the Straw Hats, which we got here, because when the shark robot attacks, it seems like the Straw Hat essentially ended up splitting apart. So on one side we have Bonnie, Chopper, Jinbei, and Luffy, and on the other side we have the remaining Straw Hats. So, you know, Zoro, Brook, Frankie, Nami, Sanji, Robin, and then Usopp. Now I will say that I did like the underwater sequence that we got, you know, with the Straw Hats in battle with this shark robot, but I think here it really essentially highlights how important Jinbei is to the crew, because he's a fisherman and he could do a lot of things in this scenario, right? If not for Jinbei, I do not know how the Straw Hats were going to handle this situation, even though the Straw Hats on the ship got messed up as well. So this really highlights how helpful Jinbei is in situations where the Straw Hats have no foothold and water is essentially around you. Now, while Jinbei did save Luffy, Chopper, Bonnie, and Luffy, on the other side, the Straw Hats on the ship were saved by a giant robot who happened to destroy the giant shark robot that was chasing them, right? And the individual that saved them appears to be Vegapunk, or at least that's what they introduced themselves as. Now, this wasn't what I was expecting when it came down to Vegapunk's design. A lot of people had him to much older, a guy, you know, with white hair, goggles, or, you know, some old man. And again, in the story it's been referenced several times that Vegapunk is sort of old. You know, when Green Bull and Fujitora were having a conversation, Green Bull did ask Fujitora if the old man Vegapunk was doing all right. So it seems that Oda, once again, it's subverting expectations as to who Vegapunk is, and it makes a lot of sense. Oda is known for this deviation tactic, right? He alludes to things in one way but also shows you something completely different when the reveal happens. So at first sight, the normal person would not think that this is Vegapunk because it doesn't make any sense, right? But I think this is Vegapunk based on the little tiny details that we get in this chapter, particularly her design, and I'll elaborate more on this. Now, first things first, based on this design, it seems like Vegapunk is a girl, but something you would notice on her clothing is that it says Punk 2. Now, you can infer a lot of things based on this, right? Knowing that Vegapunk is the god of science in the One Piece world, and knowing that he has cloning down to a T, more proficient than even Judge and the other scientists, it makes a lot of sense that if Vegapunk was truly old, he would try to clone himself or a version of himself so that he could live longer or offshoot himself to other bodies. And I think this is the case here with this girl here. This is indeed Vegapunk, but in a different body or a different version of Vegapunk. So maybe the real Vegapunk is maybe in some sort of tube, or maybe he can't leave his lab because he's connected to all sorts of some sort of life-sustaining equipment, but he uses this version of himself, right, with the same intellect as his, to move around and get things done, right? And I think that's what's happening here. This is essentially a clone of Vegapunk, or a clone of his mind, or an offshoot of his personality and intellect. So this version of Vegapunk that we're seeing here is indeed Vegapunk, but just in a different body or a clone of sorts. And again, based on the Punk 2 that we see on her clothing, it seems like this is number 2, and so there might be another one, or Vegapunk might be number 1, or they could be even multiple versions, right? Punk 3, Punk 4, things like that. And again, it makes sense. Vegapunk seems to be an old person, and it makes sense that he would try to clone himself to keep his knowledge intact in the world. So I will say that this was definitely a surprising reveal, very interesting for sure, but Oda is definitely using reverse psychology here, making us think that this isn't Vegapunk, but in reality it is Vegapunk, just a clone of himself. So I already like where this is going. I think this is also going to be a pretty cool arc for Frankie, because, you know, he's well versed in science and he also has ties to Vegapunk. We know that he studied at Vegapunk's home island. So again, Oda seems to be creating something between Frankie and Vegapunk. So this is going to be a pretty good arc for Frankie, right? In terms of character and also science. So if anything, I don't know if this is going to be an arc where there's going to be trouble for the most part, but more so an information dump, because again, Vegapunk knows a lot of things, you know, devil fruit included. So we might get the reveal as to the origins of devil fruits. So there's a lot that we can get from this arc. Now on Bonnie's side of things, we come to find out that she came alone to this island intentionally, right? Because she has personal history with Vegapunk. And I think a lot of people have been speculating that Bonnie was related to Vegapunk in some way, shape, or form, maybe because of her ability, or, you know, she might be Vegapunk's daughter, but there is a personal relationship between the two. Honestly, I'm glad that we have someone like Bonnie, you know, right here with us, because again, she's one of the supernovas that we know the least about. So this is going to be very interesting for sure. But we finally get the reveal as to what island we're on and where we're heading next, pretty much, and that is Egghead Island, which is Vegapunk's research lab, and it is a world government island. So there is bound to be trouble, or at least Marines possibly being on the island, you know, protecting Vegapunk, because I would assume that a lot of people would try to attack this island, or it might have its own natural defenses, just like that shark, but it's definitely not an island where the Straw Hats can just stroll in, you know, without any troubles. But it seems like since Bonnie does have a connection to Vegapunk, we might be able to do that because of the relationship between the two. But even with the other Vegapunk clone that we do see, she doesn't seem to be hostile. And I think one thing we've always wondered was what type of person Vegapunk was, and we got the assumption that he wasn't probably an evil person, but he was definitely very invested in science, that he would do maybe immoral things here and there. But again, we do also find out things about him in which we do know that he uses prisoners for his experiments, so he does have some moral compass. But with the Seraphim, we're seeing that they're children, so that kind of creates a conflict in his morality, right? So again, it doesn't seem like Vegapunk is an evil person. I don't think he's evil, but he may do things here and there just to evolve science, right? Even though that might come with, you know, sacrifices. So I think this is an arc that everyone's gonna like, because Vegapunk has been teased for the longest now, and finally getting a reveal here, even though this is not all of it, there's probably more to this, was definitely great. So I'm excited to see more. We're definitely going to get a lot of info dumps, not just from Vegapunk himself, but also from Bonnie as to other things that has transpired in the story, particularly events of the Reverie, things like Kuma. You know, it all ties in perfectly together. On top of the fact that the Seraphims were introduced very recently as well, so it makes a lot of sense. Now, we do also get to see the Marines in this chapter, particularly Tashiki and the kids from Punk Hazard, which makes a lot of sense because we know that the kids were heading to Vegapunk so that he could help them, and we're seeing that he's somehow making that possible with the kids growing smaller. But they're not exactly on the island, but they are close to the island. So there is a possibility that we might see Smoker as well. Now, we do also get Sword in this chapter and a bunch of new Marines. There's Doll, which is the vice admiral of this base, and she has a pretty cool design, not gonna lie. I think a lot of the fan base are gonna like her. We see other members of Sword here apart from Helmeppo. There's Hibari, and there's seemingly a very high position person there as well, Prince Groose, but I'm not exactly sure where he ranks within Sword. From what it looks like, Drake might be the head of this Legion of Sword, not necessarily the leader of Sword itself, but at least it seems like Drake seems to be above these guys in terms of rank. And so here it seems like Helmeppo and Hibari are looking for a way for them to get Vegapunk to send a Seraphim into Blackbeard's pirate base to get Kobe back. So it seems like Oda is setting up multiple plot lines with this. So I'm not surprised that we're getting a marine element in here, because again, since Vegapunk is world government affiliated, it makes a lot of sense that the Marines might play a role here, specifically in the Navy base that's very close by. So we might see an interaction between, you know, Sword, the Marines, Tashigi, and the Straw Hats eventually, because they might eventually go to Egghead Island. So that's going to be interesting for sure. But overall, this was a very solid chapter and a good start for a new arc. I'm really excited to see what comes next. Again, knowing how long Vegapunk has been built up, it's exciting to see that we're going to get something here. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Let's go for 1,000 likes. Comment down below what you guys think. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and hit the bell if you want to get notified for future videos. You can follow me on Twitter at Pharaohspace. But it is Pharaoh, guys, and I will see you folks later. Peace.